Today's speaker is Layne Chastain. He is with US Formliner. Layne did me the favor of speaking at one of our luncheons here to our local chapter not that long ago, and did a great job. So I know you guys will enjoy him today. But Layne is the Eastern Sales Manager for US Formliner. He's been with the company for 6 years. In addition to sales, he conducts AIA accredited presentations for architectural firms within the southern and eastern United States. Prior to his time with US Formliner, Mr. Chastain worked in sales, training, and management for several public agencies and private companies. He authored the Jobs for All grant, which resulted in an award of $3.35 million to the University of Georgia's Institute on Human Development and Disability. This grant was selected by former Georgia Governor Roy Barnes as the model for the Department of Labor's one-stop employment sites throughout the state. Mr. Chastain served as a facilitator to help the Georgia Department of Family and Children's Services transition to a statewide, unified, computer-based data system called Georgia Shines. In the early years of the 21st century, Mr. Chastain bought and rehabilitated distressed homes in Athens, Georgia. He holds a master's degree in counseling from the University of Georgia and resides in rural Clark County, Georgia. And with that, I will turn it over to Layne.
And it's great to be here. Appreciate the introduction and appreciate the opportunity to present here on Architects Day. And what I want to do is we want to talk about Formliners, an introduction to Formliners. And I know some of you have probably used Formliners in the past. To some of you, it's probably a new topic. But we just want to delve in and get our feet wet, learn a little bit about how to use Formliners, what they're made of, limitations, and strengths. And we want to talk about what a Formliner is. A Formliner is essentially a mold. I've told some people, think of it in terms of the old Jell-O molds, when you want Jell-O to take a certain shape. But in this case, of course, we want concrete to take on the shape so that we make concrete look like something other than typical concrete. It's used to achieve a variety of designs. It can mimic virtually any traditional building materials. And you can also create a lot of artistic impressions. From an architect's standpoint, of course, it's the way that we help you create your aesthetic vision, because we want you to look at the concrete and look at the finished project as being art. And I want to show a few projects that we've helped architects achieve that with. This is a custom project from Fremont, California, and it uses several standard Formliner patterns along with some customization. Some CNC, the images were CNC'd in this case. And I tell a story about this one. I was told when this project was in the development that it was in Fremont, California. And when I said I didn't know much about Fremont, they said, you know, this is Tesla. So for the next 2 years, I told everybody I was presenting to that we had a Formliner project with Tesla, only to find out when I was having dinner with the colleague that had this project after a couple of years that this is actually about a mile from Tesla. So it's not nearly as impressive as it was when I put it in the presentation, but it's a nice custom project and I still like to keep it in here. And this is a dormitory in Dubai. And this was using GFRC. And actually the way this is created and the way that it's environmentally friendly, there is no air conditioning in this building. But this is a facade created for a dormitory. And GFRC is just one of the concrete types that you can use Formliners with. I like to put this one in here because we were talking about stains a minute ago. And this slide shows how you can use a Formliner in conjunction with stain to give concrete the appearance of something that's totally different from what it is. In this case, we've used a gold stain, a metallic stain, with a standard Formliner to create a metallic look, but everything here is concrete. These are balcony panels. A lot of times with Formliners, and we'll talk a little later about custom versus standard patterns, but with custom patterns, a lot of times you use the CNC machine to create the impressions that you want to achieve. And that's what we've done here with these balcony panels. This is a photo engraved Formliner, and I've got a section in the presentation that talks about this, so I'll just mention it now and we'll get to that later. These are custom art panels using a 3D Formliner process. Now, in some cases, it's not CNC. In some cases, this being one of them, we have artists that create the master molds that we use then to create the Formliners. And that's what was done in this case to get an authentic custom art panel. It's a native art panel used in Canada. This just shows you some other examples of uses of Formliners: ceiling domes, precast cornice panels. And these are using the glass reinforced gypsum to create, as you can see, you're able to create some very intricate patterns using the Formliners. Now, you've seen some of the ways that some of the things Formliners can do. Let's look at some of the popular construction applications for Formliners. Formliners are used in a wide variety of projects that you may or may not have thought of before. One is garages. We see quite a few garages, parking structures that use Formliners to give them a stronger aesthetic appeal. And that's what was done here using the custom Formliner pattern. Commercial buildings, a lot of commercial buildings are using Formliners. And this is an example of taking two Formliner patterns to get a customized appearance. We use a brick Formliner, and down in the bottom to the right there, you can see that we've used a stone Formliner. And the two together give an impression that the building's made of brick and stone when it's 100% concrete. And once again, staining has been used on the brick so that it gives an authentic brick appearance. There are some Formliner patterns you can use naturally with the natural concrete look, and some things you really want to stain to give it a more authentic appearance. One of the latest innovations and one of the areas where Formliners are becoming more popular is on internal structures. And in this case, these are ultra high performance concrete panels, but also we use gypsum, or the customers use gypsum to create walls using Formliners. MSE panels. These along the highways are very popular now. You see a lot of ashlar stone patterns used, some ribbed patterns, some different things, just so that it doesn't look like, I mean, you can tell it's concrete. This is an example of where the color is not essential to give you what you want, unless you want something that requires the use of color. But most of the times with the MSEs, you just get a pattern on the concrete color. Retaining walls, usually along highways, but not always. And you can see in some cases with the retaining walls, they use the color as up in the top, middle, and in some cases, and the bottom left. And in some cases, they just rely on the concrete appearance, and it's perfectly fine. Boundary and fence walls, and this again is all concrete. To me, the rock wall to the left, in the upper left, looks very authentic, but and the wood walls as well. But these are just standard patterns used for boundary walls. Sound barrier walls with DOT. In parts of the country, parts of the United States, these are extremely popular. And you typically see them where there's a residential section adjoining an expressway, and they put the sound walls up to deflect the noise. And it's good if it's a decorative pattern. Now, we look at some of the things that Formliners, some of the type projects Formliners are used for, but what types of concrete construction are conducive to using Formliners? And then we'll talk about what type of Formliners you use with each type of construction. Tilt-up panels. This is something in tilt-up you might not have thought of using Formliners. You typically think of using them with precast, but it's a perfectly good application to use them with tilt-up panels. And you can see in the bottom right-hand corner a staining crew applying stain to the building to give it the authentic brick and stone look. And with our sister company, Knockoff, the crews actually come out and apply the stains themselves because it's often a multiple step approach. You have a primary color and then a lot of accent colors to give it a natural appearance. Precast is where you typically think of using Formliners, and this is a project using a precast panel of wood designed to look like rustic wood. Cast and place walls. Typically you use the single-use Formliners for cast and place walls, and we'll talk about the single use as we go through. And this is another cast and place wall using a rock pattern. In terms of types of Formliners, there are two types that we use: the plastic Formliners and the Elastomeric Formliners. And I want to take a couple of minutes to talk about each type. With the plastic Formliners, these are usually single application. You can get limited use out of some of the thicker plastics, some of the ABS patterns. These are made either of styrene or ABS. And in styrene, you think of that always as a single use. You're only going to pour on it one time. With the ABS, you can get up to 10 uses out of a panel. With the plastic liners, though, you're limited to some pretty basic designs because you don't want anything that's too thick, because with plastic liners, if they're too thick, you're going to have to support them quite a bit because a plastic liner is hollow where you have a lot of relief on the back side. So if you're pouring concrete on that, the weight can tend to cause deflection, and we'll talk about how to limit that a little later on. One good thing about plastic liners is that they're the least expensive of all foam liners. These prices down here might not hold true today with all of the supply chain issues we're having, but typically about $2.50 to $8 is a square foot is your typical plastic foam liner. Now, these are just a couple of examples of plastic foam liners. And this shows some of the limitations and some of the strengths of the plastic liner. You can see the two pictures at the bottom. You've got a relief built into the project because the maximum size of this foam liner panel is going to be 12 feet by 4 feet. So if you have a reveal every 12 feet, then you don't have to worry about the seam that would be there, because otherwise you're going to get a seam where the two panels join. And this shows that. This shows a seam where your panels are joining in a wood and a wall that's designed to look like wood. And one thing you can see with the seam, these panels do what we call match, but they don't mate. And what I mean by that, the wood grain continues over the crack so that the shape of the board is there and there's a continuation, but there's a disruption in the pattern because of the crack. And this is an inherent condition with using plastic liners. There's little way other than using a planned reveal to eliminate the appearance of those plastics. I mean, the appearance of those seams. Now, elastomeric foam liners, these are made of rubber, and to some extent they're flexible, stretchable. They can be used on a radius. They're very malleable. And these are available in high-use materials. An elastomeric foam liner is designed to use many times. And they are very good at capturing detail. You can do almost any type of design using an elastomeric foam liner. The only thing you've got to remember is the deeper the pattern, the more expensive the liner, because the deeper the pattern, the more rubber it takes to create the liner. And once again, these prices would have been great before COVID, and I hope they'll return to that, $12 to $85, depending on the depth of the liner, and those are average. But the prices can be somewhat higher than that right now. And one thing to remember with the urethane, people will call us up and they'll say, how much is a foam liner? And we really have to know the specific pattern, because there's quite a bit of variation in the urethane liners. With the plastic liners, not so much, but with urethane, there's quite a bit of variation. We can't just give you a square foot price without knowing the depth of the foam liner and several other variables. This is an example where a urethane liner was used to create a custom facade at a subway. And you can see this looks to be quite deep, about 3 inches. This is more depth than you would ever use with a plastic form liner, but this is a perfectly good application of a urethane liner. Remember, we looked at the wood walls a few slides back, and we saw the seams. This is a similar pattern using a similar design using urethane. And as you can see, this creates a lot more natural appearance, looks a lot more like wood. You don't have those disruptions. And it's not that those disruptions with seams are always bad. It's just you really need to be thinking as you're looking at your project, what type of material do I want to use? What type of appearance do I want to achieve? In a tight area, if you're using spans that are less than 12 feet per wall, it might be perfectly good to use plastic because the seam's not going to matter. But if you need to get a 30-foot span, you're going to need to use urethane to minimize the appearance of your seams. Now, we talk about standard versus custom patterns. And what we mean by this, a standard pattern is a pattern that you could call our company, and we could give you a quote on that standard pattern if we know what size you're using and know a few things about your project. We can quote that pattern outright because these are patterns that we have masters available for. All Formliner companies that I know of make their urethane Formliners to order. They don't keep any in stock, but they have the masters there available. So it's always faster to get a standard project than a custom project. And with us, we have about between 250 and 300 standard patterns to emulate stone, ribs, some abstract patterns, some stucco and concrete wall type patterns, smooth patterns. But oftentimes an architect will want to go outside those patterns and do something custom. So I want to show you a few slides using standard patterns, and then we'll look at some custom jobs. Now, these are just standard. This is a standard abstract pattern. This is a standard wood pattern. One thing I like to point out, this is not a project that I did, so I can tell on it. If you look over toward the right middle of the slide, you'll see a line there that runs across about 6 boards. I would not have designed that way because the boards would not naturally end that way. I would have toothed that so that you've got those boards ending at different places, because to me, that's not a natural application of a board. But this is a standard pattern, and it was done according to the way it was specified. This is a rock wall. Of course, you can see that. But this is done without any additional color. This is using a standard pattern. I believe this one is called the Brabant. I believe this is the Brabant. It's a pattern that we sell quite a bit of. And you can see that they have planned reveals in between there. And it's better with the patterns like this, the urethane patterns. Some of our patterns go 25, 30 feet. But not all of them do. The urethane patterns are variable sizes, but within the size of the master, you can get any size you want to. So if one goes 10 feet tall by 20 feet wide, you can get anything up to that without it being a custom pattern. Anything above that, we would have to add on to our existing master and create a custom pattern, or what we call a semi-custom. It's where we take a standard pattern and enhance it in some way to meet the specs. This is another standard pattern. About 60% of our production, in spite of the fact that we have a large number of standard patterns, I went too fast, about 60% are custom patterns. And again, one of the strengths of custom patterns is that we can duplicate most any design. We're very flexible in sizing. It does take a longer production time, though, and it requires more advanced planning and coordination to achieve the results that you want to achieve. We've got to make sure that what the architect envisions is what we envision when we start to produce it. So it requires quite a bit of planning back and forth. Here are a few examples of custom projects that we've done. And I mistakenly called this a dolphin at one time, and then noticed that that's a stream down at the bottom. So these are actually salmon. And this is a custom project, but it's a custom project that uses 4 or 5 standard designs. And then we did the 3D shapes. But if you look at the background there, that's a very tight ribbed design. And the peak that's projecting right under the peak there, that's a stone design. And the salmon were cut out of what we call our smooth pattern, smooth design, when we want to have really smooth concrete. So we took 3 standard patterns and did some CNC and did some cutout work and achieved this. This is a museum in Germany. I like to use this because it shows that you can come up with a really creative idea without it being very expensive. If we were live, if I was where I could see you guys, I would ask you if you knew what these shapes on the side of the building were made of, but we're not, so I'll show you. This design for this museum was achieved by using the bottoms of 2-liter bottles. We took rubber, and while the rubber was wet, created the impressions of the bottles. And then we poured on that. And as you see you can see the negative to the right, and we would pour on that, and it would give you the positive protrusion there for the museum. So this is a very unique, very creative idea, and it didn't require a lot in terms of special materials to come up with that. This is a landscape wall that appears to be 3D. We do have 3D concrete. This, though, it's all visual. It's not 3D. It's using a standard pattern for the background and then just smooth Formliner for the steps. This is an example of a 3D concrete pattern. This would be used, would be done either with CNC, or an artist might use clay or some other materials to create it. What we're looking for is any surface that we can pour on, any medium that would create the image that we're looking for. See, I went one too far. In this case, someone wanted to use sand on the beach to create an impression in concrete. And you can see all that was required was to form up a section of the beach that showed the wave pattern they wanted. Then they would have applied a release agent, cast their rubber on within the area they marked off, and then take that out, form it up, and pour concrete on it, and use it, in this case, for an art panel. Sometimes we're doing historic preservation or a restoration where it's important to create something new that is identical to something that's already in existence. And when that's the case, we can go on site and actually use rubber to paint on a section of the wall or whatever it is we're trying to reproduce, and creating a Formliner that we can then take back to the shop and pour on. And with a combination of the Formliner and stain, we can have a continuous wall or a continuous structure that combines the old and the new. And this is an elephant, but there's a purpose for it. We had an architect that wanted an elephant designed Formliner, wanted it to look like elephant skin. And this was the result. And it took 3 people to achieve this. We had one feeding the elephant peanuts, one pouring rubber on the elephant's back, and another one holding the elephant. And I'm actually not telling the truth. We didn't actually come in contact with a real elephant except to study the skin. And then this was created without touching the elephant. Now, I want to show you the production process, how we would go about making a custom liner from conception of the idea through getting it onto the facade. And there's probably better examples to use, but this is the one we had available. Let's say that your idea was that you want to put an impression of coastal grasses on a building facade. You want the building facade to have an image or an impression or create the impression of coastal grasses. Maybe it's a changing building out near the beach or something of that nature. So how do we develop from idea to getting the appearance of the coastal grasses onto the building? Well, the first thing we do is we look at the coastal grasses and we come up with a design and create CAD drawings. And then these are converted to 3D models where we then bring it back and show you and say, okay, does this seem to capture what you're wanting to capture in this design? And then the drawings are converted to CNC software for cutting of the design. And then the design is cut onto blank panels to create an impression. And with the CNC machine, of course, it creates a finite size panel. The one we have in the shop currently does about 10 feet by 4 feet. And oftentimes you will need a bigger surface for that to create what you're trying to create. And when that's the case, you do it in separate panels and you seal the surface, join the panels and make it as big as you want to achieve what you're trying to achieve. Then the master mold that you're going to pour on is framed. And throughout everything we do, at every step, every juncture, quality control is extremely important because we have to make sure that there is no imperfection in anything that could show in the concrete or that could create any sort of disruption. So at every step, there are quality checks to ensure that everything is as perfect as possible. When the master is finished, it's sprayed with a mold release and sprayed or brush coated. It could be either one. But you put a mold release on, you wait for the mold release to dry before you cast rubber. And you want to make sure when this mold release dries, it's going to have a waxy feel to it. It's going to feel as though you've got a coat of wax on the master. Then you pour the urethane. Now this is self-leveling urethane, and it also has a very rapid hardening time. From the time you pour the urethane until it hardens is about 25 minutes. So you want to, in some cases, you have several people pouring simultaneously, depending on the size, because the idea is to get everything poured and screeded before the rubber starts to harden. And as you can see, this has been screeded. The back surface is leveled. And after 24 hours, and in some cases slightly less, but you want to leave it down for close to 24 hours, then the liner can be demolded. And to the touch, it's going to seem dry, but this will continue to cure for several days. So you want to leave it, or we would leave it lying flat. And a lot of times a customer will say, if you pour 5 liners this week, can I get 5 liners on Friday? And in most cases, the answer would be no, because it's going to take longer for those liners to cure than the pouring process took. And even though they appear to be dry, there could be some damage to the liners in shipping if they're shipped before they're perfectly cured. And before the liners are packaged, they're cut to size and inspected once again. And the more sizes of liners you use, the more framing it requires and the more time that it takes. But we will cut to any sizes that you want. We just finished a project that used the same patterns but had 51 different sizes of Formliner. So that's another step in the process that needs to be figured in terms of how much time is it going to take to get the liners for this project. Then a tube is used to roll the liner. Not only does this help reduce the stress of the liner, but it also consolidates things for shipping so that you can ship more in a compact area. And then the Formliners are securely packaged for shipping. In the foreground here, you see a stack of plastic Formliners. And on the dock are some of the rubber Formliners. The rubber Formliners don't need to be in direct sunlight or exposed a lot to the elements. They will last for a long time, but you've got to protect them and follow what we call our Formliner application guide. We once packaged everything in a crate like you see the urethane liners on the dock, but we started packaging the plastic with cardboard and pallets simply because of the incredible increase in cost to plywood and any lumber that we're going through right now as a result of the pandemic and the aftermath. So once we finish with the liners and we ship them out to the customer, then we start, in this case, we're going to describe a precast process. We have the production table, and then in some cases, the customer will place glue directly on the production table and then place the Formliner directly on top of that to get adhesion so that the Formliner will not come loose when it's poured on. Although this is done, it comes with a precaution. Once you glue that Formliner to your production table, it will not come up in one piece. You're going to be chipping it up because that glue really adheres to the table. So what we recommend is that you apply it to plywood or some other surface that you can take up so that it doesn't damage your table. And this is a Formliner that is on the pouring table in a precast factory. Then when you have the Formliner in place, you apply a release agent, just like when you were pouring the Formliner on the master, except you're using a different stripping wax. But once again, you brush it on or you spray it on, you allow it to dry. And once it's dry, you're ready to pour the concrete. And there's a picture from a precast plant where they're pouring concrete on the Formliner surface that we want to use for our beach grass. So we go from the simple sketch and the idea of using a beach grass to the final result, which is the building with that design on the side. And again, the beach grass is a simple example, but it's something that we had the whole process recorded so that we could go through. And this could have been any sort of design any sort of custom design that you wanted to create. In some cases, the steps might be a little different, but for the most part, the sequence I've just shown is how you would do it. Now, I want to show a film to take a closer look at plastic Formliners. And in the event that this film does not show correctly, stop me and we'll check something. But I think it's worked in practice sessions. We want to show you going from the Formliner master, this is a kiln line master, to applying the plastic and going through the thermoforming process that ends up with Formliners. Okay, this is in the thermoform machine. A plastic meets the kiln line master, and there are a number of holes you'll see in a minute in these masters so that the heated plastic can be sucked into shape. And this is just showing it from another direction. And I stopped the audio on this because it was some of the most atrocious music I've ever heard. And it was something developed in our workshop, and they did a pretty good job of the photography, but a horrible job of the music. So I killed the audio on it. But you can see that being sucked into place through the air hose. it takes different amounts of time depending on the thickness of the plastic and whether you're using styrene or ABS. For what we call a Sty 60, which is a medium density plastic, it will take about 90 seconds to create the raw plastic liner. And when it comes out, it looks like this, and the edges have to be cut away. And with our thermoforming machine, the size Formliner you're going to end up with is going to be close to 12 feet by 4 feet. It can vary slightly depending on the particular design and the depth of it. Okay. Now, again, here's showing the matching of a wood grain Formliner top to bottom. As you can see, this is a 12-foot end, meaning a 12-foot end, and the pattern carries over from side to side, but you've got your seam there. The same thing with stone. When you're talking about a pattern, remember we've got mating versus matching, and this is a matching pattern. The stone carries over from one liner to the other. It's continuous, but you're going to have that seam. If you want liners to mate, typically, particularly with plastic, you're going to need to tooth the liner, which is what's been done with this brick pattern. When you join two liners together that have been toothed like this, you're going to have liners that mate. And although there's going to be a seam, it's not going to be a continuous seam, and it's not going to be nearly as apparent as just two liners that are butted up against each other. And remember earlier we talked about deflection. We talked about the need, or one of the drawbacks to plastic liners is that they're hollow where they have relief. And as you can see in this little video, where they're hollow, they're flexible. So to prevent deflection, you need to put some sort of a brace there. And you can do a variety of things. You could use plastic, you could use wood, you could use foam. Different customers use different things, but it is important that you protect against deflection, particularly with precast. With cast in place or mainly with cast in place, you're not going to have as much pressure probably as you move up the wall. Down toward the bottom, you're going to have the most pressure because the concrete's going to be compacted more down there. People ask a lot about using liners on a radius, and plastic can be used depending on the pattern. Plastic can be used to some extent on a radius. If you're going to get much tighter than this, than the curvature they're showing here, though, you're probably going to want to use urethane because it's more malleable. If you get plastic into too tight an angle or try to make it, try to get it in too tight a radius, it can crack. Now, we've got two methods for transferring photos or artwork on the concrete, and I want to talk about these for just a moment. You saw the picture earlier of the photo engraved Formliner as it was finished. I want to quickly look at that process. We start with a picture, and it can be any picture, color, black and white. It could also be any artwork, any geometric pattern or a painting or whatever. But we use angles to change a color picture or whatever type of picture into 256 shades of gray. And these shades of gray are not actually achieved by any color process. It's all done through angle and depth of cut. The computer converts the info into CAD, and then you mill the master, and you can see the little striations there. The cuts are used to create the image. And this would be the negative of the image that you want to have on the concrete. This is your master. And it would be formed up just like we showed for the beach grass. You would form this up to pour concrete on it. You would treat it with to pour the rubber on it. You would take that master, you'd pour a Formliner, then you would take the Formliner and pour the concrete on it, and this would be the result in the concrete. Now, there are some things to know about when you're trying to pick a visual depiction in concrete, when you want to look at pictures or something in concrete. One thing about these, I'll show you a couple of photo engraved projects. This is a warehouse. They use photo engraving process to create a forest. And an interesting thing about this warehouse, this was in a community where across from the warehouse, there's a very dense forest. And there was quite a bit of controversy in the neighborhood over erecting a warehouse in such close proximity to the forest. And as a compromise, they used photo engraved concrete to create the impression of a forest on the side of the warehouse. And so it was more aesthetically pleasing, and the folks who were upset about it were a lot happier with the warehouse in this shape than just a plain warehouse. This is a museum, and you can see they've used quite a bit of photo engraving to create the impressions. They've got scientists on there and show an old, airplane, and they're doing things to create, showing images of historical occurrences, historical people, to put on the facade of this museum. Now, the thing about the photo engraving, though, is that it's only visible in certain light and at certain angles. If you approach the building from some angles, you won't see the image at all. If you approach it from other angles, the image will pop. The same thing with certain light. In certain light, the image will pop, and in certain light, you won't see the image at all. So this is used when you want that surprise element, when you're walking up on the photo and it just jumps out at you. If you want something that's more continuous, something that you will see from any angle or in any light, and you can create that in one application, you would look at our article process. With the photo engraved Formliners that we just saw, you can use those hundreds of times. You can pour on them hundreds of times. They're done in urethane. With the article, what you're doing is you're creating images on the concrete using surface retarder. And the surface retarder is placed on a special film, and this is only used for one use. You're going to take and cast the concrete on that. In this case, of course, we've got a leaf pattern. And you don't use any release agent when you're using the article. These are, and once again, you can use any photo, any art, anything that you want to show on the concrete facade. And I should say too, with the photo engraved Formliners and with the article, these are only practical when doing cast in place. You wouldn't use these applications on precast. You wouldn't use these applications on cast in place. I had that backwards. Only when you're doing precast would you use the article or the photo engraved Formliners. But you pour the concrete directly on the image, and the concrete is vibrated and leveled. And the next day, you would demold it. And I think you can see, if you see some of the little dull areas there, when this is first demolded, you're going to see the image to an extent, but it's going to need to be power washed to clear away any of the residue so that you get the image in more clarity. Now, one good thing about Artico is you can do enormous murals or walls with this. One roll, it's made on rolls, and one roll of Artico can cover an area that's 11 feet tall by 82 feet long. Or you can reverse it and have an area that's 11 feet wide and 82 feet tall. It can be used either way. And there are a lot of creative ways to think of this. Although you can only use the Artico plastic for one application, in quite a few instances, the customer doesn't need this much surface, 11 by 82, to create their image. So they might do the image, they might purchase a roll and have their image repeated 4 times in case they want to use it again, because sometimes they will find something that they'll have a use for later on, or they might just want to have a duplicate. I know we did a article project for Middle Tennessee University, and the Precast company bought an extra image so that they could cast it on concrete and use it as a display in their yard at the Precast plant. Now, the thing about the Formliners is that the process takes longer than you think. As you've seen, as we've gone through here, I've talked about some of the areas where a lot of time is required. And a lot of times we have a customer that'll call and say, I need X Formliner, or I've got this custom project and we need it in 2 weeks. And we do everything that we can to accommodate that. But in most cases, it's not possible to take a project from origin to fruition in that tight a time frame. Let's look at the ordering process. When someone orders a Formliner, we've got our lead time versus our production time. What we're talking about with lead time is once you're making the order, how much time is it before we can start the project? And the way the factory floor works is that there's only room for so many pouring tables on the floor. And if all the pouring tables are full, then the next project has to wait until one of the pouring tables are open. So we might tell you when it's time for you to order, it's going to be 4 weeks lead time. That means 4 weeks before we can start your project. Then we have production time, which is the amount of time it will take once we start to produce your project from start to finish. Unfortunately, this is usually a shorter time than the lead time, especially since COVID has come into the picture. After you call us and we're making the order, we do the documentation. And we've got to be very exacting during the documentation process because, as you can imagine, we can be looking at the same pattern. Let's say we're looking at a wood pattern. And you've got in your mind, this is a simple example, but it works. You've got it in your mind that you want this wood pattern to go horizontally. You want the borders to go horizontal. We've got it in our mind that it goes vertical because let's say this particular wood pattern is typically done vertically. We're going to do orientation drawings, have you review them, sign off on them to make sure that we're orienting the design in the way that you want it oriented and that we're showing the dimensions that you need and that you want. In some cases, you'll have reveals, chamfers, all the specifics. We're going to make sure we've got them all documented and that you've reviewed them, we've reviewed them, you signed off on them. And also we're going to have the work order that shows exactly, you're ordering 20 liners. These are the dimensions. We want to make sure that we have exactly what you need. And it takes just a little time for that. Once your lead, but that can be done during the lead time. Once your lead time is over and we're ready for production, we have a setup. Now, let's say you're getting one size Formliner. That's one setup. That's pretty easy. Let's say you're getting 50 sizes of Formliners. That's going to be a lot of setups. So setup can either be a fast process or a slow process, depending on what you're doing and what your project's like. Now, then we have the pouring or thermoforming. And with the thermoforming, we can typically produce on the type machine you just saw. On one of those machines, we can produce about 100 liners a day on the plastic. With the urethane, we typically can produce 1 to 2 liners per day per master. So if you're getting 30 liners and we only have 1 master, that's going to be 15 to 30 pouring days, depending on the specifics of the project. And then you've got your curing time. Of course, as we're pouring, the liners are curing. The first liners we pour are curing as we pour later liners. But the curing process, when we finish that last liner, it's at least going to be 2 or 3 days before it's cured. As the liners are produced and cured, they go through QC. But once the liners are finished being produced, it's another day or 2 before the last one gets through QC. And then we've got our packaging process, which is usually pretty quick. Usually from the time the QC is finished, the next day it can be, that day or the next day it can be packaged and ready for shipping. And we've always got to think of certain shipping considerations. There are, we have some stripping waxes that are chemical based and are hazmat. We've got some that are water based and can be shipped anywhere. We want to make sure that we're making liners that can be shipped. Let's say that your project called for a liner that was 20 feet by 15 feet, and you wanted it made with a plywood backing. We could create that in the shop, but there's no way we could ship that, even on a flatbed truck. So one of the things to consider when we're planning a project is, can everything we're making be shipped conventionally? And another time factor is everything stemming from the COVID pandemic. I'm sure all of you are experiencing supply chain disruptions. We're having a lot of trouble right now scheduling LTL shipments. Some trouble, though not as much, scheduling dedicated trucks. So the whole reason for this whole slide is, the earlier you order the Formliner, the better. If you need it in 3 months, order it as soon as you can. And we would rather have it done early than get it late and have it come to you late. And then finally, specifying Formliners. We love it when architects specify our Formliners. And we want to be as hands-on or hands-off as you would like us to be in that case. But there are several things that we would like to help with if you want us to. One of the things is whether the pattern is customer standard. You can look on the website, or we can send you a catalog and you can pick out any standard patterns that you want, or use several standard patterns simultaneously. If it's custom, of course, it's going to take more time, and we want to make sure that we fully see your vision with you, and that we accomplish and that the end result looks like you want it to look. One of the things with our standard pattern is there are some patterns that may be on the catalog that have never been called for in the US. And though we manufacture in the US, we get a lot of our patterns from Europe. And there are a few standard patterns that have never been specified in the US. We've never had a demand for them, and we don't have them. That doesn't mean we can't obtain them. It just means that that's going to add to the process, and it's going to take about 8 or 10 weeks to get a master from Europe if it's something we have to import. If it's something that we can make in-house, which some of our standard patterns we can just make in-house, then it's going to take an extra 3 weeks. But it's a consideration whether it's something that's available and we've got the master on the shelf, or whether we're going to have to make it. Another thing when specifying are the limitations of certain Formliner types. Think about whether your project can hide seams, or whether the pattern that you're picking out is one that can hide seams, or one that is going to be difficult, whether seams is something that you want to eliminate, or whether they can be visible in the project you're using. And that will help you determine whether you want to specify plastic or whether you want to specify urethane. And especially in terms of size, with the urethane, there's a lot more variation in size. With the plastic, we have roughly 12 feet by 4 feet. So when you're looking at size, if you need a wall to go 30 feet tall, even in urethane, we're probably not going to have a pattern that's 30 feet tall without a seam. But we can customize to minimize the visibility of that seam. It's going to take a little more time, but we can take our master, say our master's 25 feet, we need to add 5 feet to it. We'll add 5 feet to it. We never guarantee that that seam will then be invisible. In the shop, we shine lights on them. We do everything, and we've got some really good artists and do everything to eliminate the seam, but we never guarantee it's going to be eliminated, because certain concrete mixtures, certain admixtures can bring out a subtle seam, certain light. So we can minimize it, but never guarantee that it's going to be completely obliterated. And that's everything. So let me know if you have any questions. I really enjoyed talking with you and appreciate your interest in Formliners. Appreciate all of you that signed up. And let me know any questions you have.
Great. Thank you, Layne.
Let me go too. If you need to reach me, here's my cell number, email. Thanks a lot.
Great. Thank you.